Every moment we spend engaging with another person, I mean, whether that's in a community meeting, arguing policy, or, just trying to coordinate a family event, it comes with a cost, a
Yeah.
psychological cost.
Hmm.
And we often focus so intently on the surface stuff, right? The superficial elements, what was said, what the policy is, what the person actually did.
The observable fact.
Exactly. But the single most important skill for managing your mental health and protecting your energy is understanding that invisible variable, the why they did it. We have to assess their intent.
And that's what we're digging into.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We are diving into a highly structured, very practical framework that our sources are calling purity of intent. And this is not some abstract philosophy.
Oh, not at all.
It's a specialized, almost an applied competency. It's drawn from the pretty intense experiences of a peer counselor and educator named Nisa Pasha. And she works, daily right at that intersection of community health, diversity issues, and high-stakes political engagement.
Yeah, these are not low-pressure environments.
Not at all. And so the mission of this deep dive is, well, it's straightforward, but it's crucial. We want to give you, the listener, a clear, reliable tool set, a way to quickly assess the underlying motives of the people around you, figure out if an interaction is going to, nurture your purpose or just actively drain your resources.
And then what to do about it.
And most importantly, use that knowledge to set sustainable, non-negotiable boundaries.
And the context here, like you said, is everything. The material is drawn from the insights of an expert who has to navigate these complex, high-pressure situations all the time. She developed this whole concept of purity of intent and the preservation of mental inheritance.
Mental inheritance, we'll get into that. I love that term.
It's a great term. In the environment she's in, community health rooms, legislative policy roundtables, they are not neutral spaces. They are they are rife with pre-existing trauma, fear, and deeply ingrained power imbalances.
So you can't just take things at face value.
You absolutely can't.
Yeah.
So the core premise she offers is that understanding an individual's purity of intent, their specific behavioral patterns, and, their often complicated relationship to power and control, it's an absolutely essential competency.
A skill.
A skill. She argues that this is not a luxury. It's a non-negotiable prerequisite for staying effective, personally and professionally, in these kinds of high-stakes spaces.
And I'm guessing this isn't about just labeling people as good or bad.
No, and that's critical.
Huh.
For the assessment to be useful, it has to be both compassionate and pragmatic. You have to account for the deep, often invisible factors that are driving how people act.
Like what?
Well, acute stress, trauma historical or recent underlying fears, past experiences with control. These factors don't excuse harmful behavior, let's be clear. But they do provide the necessary context to figure out if you're dealing with, say, intentional manipulation, or if it's just someone projecting their own unresolved distress.
And that distinction is everything.
It's the bedrock of setting a strategic boundary.
Okay, so let's get into it. The first big idea here is what you called the psychological price tag.
Yes.
Here is where the source material immediately establishes a heavy cost. The key insight is this assertion, and I'm quoting here: every interaction carries a psychological price tag.
Think about that for a second. Every single one.
Yeah, think of that phrase like a mandatory fee. Every meeting you go to, every email chain, every attempt at reconciliation, it's going to cost you something internal. The question isn't how to avoid paying the price.
You can't avoid it.
You can't. The question is, was the interaction worth the cost? Did you get value from it, or were you emotionally robbed?
That required assessment is exactly why this framework was developed in the first place. In these high-stakes environments, political systems, healthcare, advocacy, hidden agendas, and power imbalances are, well, they're common. They are structurally baked into the design.
They're a feature, not a bug.
A feature, not a bug, exactly.
Yeah.
So in these spaces, you are never just trading information. You are exchanging or, contesting emotional stability and clarity.
Okay, but I have to ask. For the listener who is, let's say, a manager in a mid-sized company, or maybe just dealing with a difficult neighbor, is this concept of a psychological price tag really applicable to their daily life? Or is this reserved for, the political elite?
Oh, it applies everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. The scale changes, but the mechanism is identical.
Give me an example.
Okay, consider a difficult neighbor. One who consistently complains about your yard work, But then when you offer a perfectly reasonable solution, they just immediately dismiss it and find a new complaint.
Right, we've all met that person.
The psychological price tag is the cost you pay trying to solve a problem they don't actually want solved. They want the drama or the attention. Or maybe they're just projecting their own internal frustration onto your lawn. You pay in emotional labor and confusion.
You leave the conversation feeling drained and wondering what just happened.
Exactly. The counselor, Nisa Pasha, she speaks of becoming intentional about choosing my battles to protect my own mental equilibrium. And mental equilibrium isn't just a state of calm, like a quiet room.
It's more active than that.
It's the stable foundation of self-trust, of clarity, and the efficacy you need for good decision-making. Think of it like the foundation of a house. If every interaction is chipping away at that foundation, eventually the whole structure collapses. And when you operate in fields that require you to absorb or manage a lot of complexity, that equilibrium needs constant, active, intentional work to maintain.
And if you allow manipulative or just inconsistent intent into your orbit, that foundation gets eroded without you even noticing the damage until it's way too late. It's like death by 1,000 cuts.
Precisely. And this is why this framework is mandatory, not optional. She notes that the political world is often designed with order, hierarchy, and hidden agendas. When systems are built on control, you cannot just passively engage and expect to keep your clarity.
Passivity is a losing strategy.
Passivity leads directly to depletion. Which brings us to what we're trying to protect.
The resources. Because the counselor realized a difficult, but, a really necessary truth. Not everyone should have access to the deep, valuable resources you possess. This isn't about becoming a hermit.
No, it's not isolation.
It's about establishing strategic self-preservation based on demonstrated trustworthiness.
And we have to be really explicit about what those resources are. If you're paying a psychological price tag, what are you paying with?
Okay.
First, your clarity. This is your ability to see situations clearly without the fog of confusion or projection or gaslighting clouding your judgment. If an interaction leaves you constantly questioning your own memory or your reality, you have paid way too much.
You've overpaid in clarity.
You've been robbed of it. Second, your emotional labor. This is the finite energy you expend managing not only your own emotional responses to stress, but, and this is critical, the energy you spend managing the emotional reactions, the outbursts, or the anxieties of other people.
I think we all know what that feels like.
Oh, yeah. If you frequently find yourself having to soothe someone else's ego after a difficult meeting, you have performed unpaid emotional labor. You've paid a price.
And third, the source calls this the valuable inheritance of knowledge and strength. I just love this term, but let's translate it into something immediately recognizable for you listening.
Think of mental inheritance as your mental battery pack, or maybe a bank account of accumulated wisdom. It's the sum total of your resilience, your intuition that you've honed through past experience, and your grounding.
It's what keeps you steady.
It's what allows you to handle the next crisis without spiraling into old patterns of fear or trauma. It is limited, and it is not renewable in the short term. If you allow these constant draining interactions, you deplete that inheritance, and that leaves you less equipped for the challenges that actually matter.
So access to this internal resource should be conditional.
Conditional upon demonstrated integrity, which is what this is all about.
So we're seeing the dual nature of the peer counselor's work emerge here. They aren't just observing individual behavior, which is, challenging enough on its own.
Right.
They are simultaneously evaluating the systems, the historical context, and the unspoken power dynamics that are influencing that behavior.
That systemic awareness is the crucial piece of the puzzle. You're not just engaging with a person, you're engaging with a person within a structure. And if you mistake a systemic constraint for a personal flaw, you waste your emotional labor trying to fix the wrong target.
That's a huge point. Can you give an example of that?
Sure. Let's say a health administrator seems intentionally slow and difficult. That's the action. You might diagnose this as a personal failing. They're malicious or they're incompetent. That's your assessment of their intent.
Okay.
But with this dual lens, you might realize they are simply following a bureaucratic protocol that's designed to limit resource disbursement. That's the system. So if you misdiagnose the conflict, you spend your mental inheritance fighting the individual.
When you should be strategically advocating for a change in the policy.
Exactly. Strategic self-preservation demands that you correctly diagnose the source of the drain. Is it the person or the system they're stuck in?
Okay, so let's get into the actionable mechanics of this. If assessing intent is our self-defense strategy, we need a clear ruler to measure it. What exactly is purity of intent in this framework, and how do we spot it?
Right.
This framework isn't asking us to be mind readers, right? It's shifting our cognitive focus. Purity of intent is fundamentally about recognizing why a person is acting, rather than just getting stuck on what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So we move the assessment from that one inflammatory thing they said in a meeting to their overall behavioral pattern and their underlying motivation.
And this is where the source provides a really necessary nuance. Purity of intent does not mean someone is perfect. It doesn't mean they always behave flawlessly. This is so critical.
So it's not about perfection.
Not at all. We are all humans under stress. We make mistakes. People will have bad days. Purity of intent is not about a lack of mistakes. It's about a consistent, discernible alignment between their stated purpose and their long-term action.
Okay, so it's about the pattern.
It's all about the pattern. What the framework assesses is whether a person's actions are, over time, honest, consistent, and genuinely aligned with the goal they publicly stated. If they say, "I am here to ensure equitable policy," then their choices, even when they're difficult or inconvenient for them, must align with equity. For anyone navigating systems of power, this consistency is the baseline requirement for establishing a safe, trusting partnership.
So if integrity is the foundation of this pure intent, what are the visible behavioral markers? What are the, say, 3 quick checks we can run when we're trying to decide whether to trust someone with our time and our energy?
Okay, these 3 markers are the visible evidence. They show that someone's intent is fundamentally sound, even if their methods are, occasionally clumsy or they're stressed. They are the prerequisites for getting access to your mental resources.
Okay, number 1.
First, the person communicates openly. This is transparency, not just clarity. It means sharing the context, the constraints, and the limitations of their actions. For instance, in a meeting, they don't just say, "That's impossible."
Right, which is just a brick wall.
It's a brick wall. The person with integrity says, "That's impossible right now because policy X dictates Y, and my hands are tied here. But let's look for an alternative path around policy X." Open communication is an invitation to partnership, not a declaration of finality.
And what if that communication is uncomfortable? Because, often transparency means admitting you made a mistake or admitting something is really difficult.
That's the sign of integrity. If someone communicates openly about a failure or a constraint, they are performing a service for you. They are lowering the psychological labor you have to expend trying to guess what is happening behind the curtain.
So you're not wasting energy trying to figure out their hidden agenda.
Exactly. When you work with people who communicate openly, you preserve your clarity.
Okay, that makes sense. What's the second marker? And I suspect this one is the most non-negotiable.
It is respecting boundaries. And it's important to define what boundary respect looks like in a high-pressure environment where people are always claiming urgency.
Yeah, everything is an emergency.
Right. It looks like acknowledging the boundary, even if they can't adhere to it perfectly in that one instance. Let's say your boundary is, "I do not take calls after 6 p.m., and a genuine emergency happens at 6:05. The person with integrity says, "I'm so sorry for violating your boundary. This is a genuine emergency that impacts X. I will minimize future contact."
They acknowledge the rule even as they're breaking it for a good reason.
Yes. The manipulator, on the other hand, says, "Well, you need to understand that my work doesn't stop at 6 p.m., and this is important." They make it about your boundary being the problem.
I see the difference. One is respectful, the other is entitled.
Exactly. Boundary respect signals that their personal objective, getting what they want right now, does not outweigh their stated purpose, which is supporting you or being your partner. If they consistently push, violate, or just ignore limits on your time, your energy, or your scope, that immediately signals that their intent is selfish no matter what words they use. Integrity recognizes and honors limits.
And the third marker takes us away from the person's intention entirely and focuses on the consequence.
Yes. Third, they take responsibility for their impact. This is the crucial distinction. A person with pure intent acknowledges that even if they didn't mean to cause harm or create an inconvenience, they accept the consequence of their actions and they work to repair the damage.
Intent doesn't erase impact.
Never. For example, imagine 2 colleagues miss a critical deadline because of some external error. Colleague A says, "I know my error delayed the whole team and I feel terrible. What steps can I take right now to mitigate the damage?" Colleague B says, "I didn't intend for this to happen. The system failed me and I was so stressed." Colleague A focuses on impact and repair. Colleague B focuses on intention and defense. The consistency between words and actions is proven by their willingness to own the impact.
That clarity is so powerful because it immediately shifts the responsibility back onto the actor, not the person who was harmed by the action.
That's the goal.
Now let's talk about the flip side, the contaminants. These are the behaviors that signal internal conflict, projection, or, a deep-seated hidden agenda. The source calls this emotional instability leaking out emotional spillover, which inevitably causes harm. So what are the three big red flags we need to watch out for that signal someone's intent is corrupted?
These are the direct signals that someone's intent is being warped by internal baggage, by their ego, or by unresolved emotional distress. These are the red flags we need to spot immediately to protect our mental inheritance.
Okay, number one.
1. Saying one thing but repeatedly doing another. This is the fundamental breach of integrity, and it's often insidious. This isn't a single mistake, it's a chronic pattern. They advocate for work-life balance in a public statement, but then repeatedly schedule mandatory meetings at 7 p.m.
Or they claim to support diversity but consistently interrupt or marginalize specific voices in private discussions.
Exactly. This pattern is so damaging because it forces the recipient to choose which reality is true, the spoken ideal or the repeated lived behavior. And so often we want to give weight to the ideal and we ignore the behavioral data right in front of us.
We want to believe the words.
We do. But when the gap between the words and the actions is vast and persistent, you are not dealing with pure intent. You're dealing with a performance.
Okay, what's the second red flag?
2. Shifting blame. This is the immediate avoidance of responsibility for their impact. Instead of owning the consequence, they deflect the outcome onto the environment, onto the system, or, and this is the most dangerous, onto you. If you are constantly engaging with someone who maintains they are always the victim of circumstances, they are likely protecting a fragile ego, not demonstrating any kind of partnership.
I think we all know that person. The one for whom the traffic is always a personal attack, the rules are always arbitrary when applied to them, and any failure is always someone else's fault. It is utterly exhausting to manage that.
It is exhausting because you have to expend your emotional labor just trying to ground them in reality. If you consistently find yourself internalizing responsibility for issues that are clearly not yours, you are interacting with someone who lacks the integrity to own their impact. Their intent is contaminated.
And the third one?
3. Creating confusion. This is the strategic use of mixed messages, ambiguity, or even gaslighting tactics that are designed specifically to keep you off balance. The source notes that this creates confusion, which perfectly describes the kind of manipulation designed to undermine your clarity and your intuition.
So if someone repeatedly uses ambiguous language that you have to ask them to clarify 3 times, or if they deny ever saying something you distinctly remember them saying,
they are actively draining your clarity. They are chipping away at your mental inheritance, one confusing interaction at a time.
And this brings us right back to mental health. The source emphasizes that recognizing this difference is crucial for protecting your well-being, especially for individuals who have experienced past trauma or systemic harm. Why is that?
It's because manipulative or confusing intent often mirrors the original patterns of harm, the unpredictability, the false promises, the denial. It can re-traumatize the individual and reinforce that feeling of self-doubt.
So when trust is undermined by these systemic mixed messages, the skill of assessing intent externally becomes an act of psychological liberation. It shifts the burden.
It absolutely does. It changes the internal monologue from, what did I do wrong? Why am I so confused? To the external diagnosis, this confusion is the predictable byproduct of their contaminated intent. That shift removes the self-blame and confirms that the source of the problem is in the other person's lack of consistency, not in your ability to navigate reality. It is a powerful, powerful validation.
Okay, so we've got the individual markers down, but now we have to zoom out again.
Yes, because intent doesn't exist in a vacuum. We have to assess it within the context of systems, particularly those with hierarchical structures, healthcare, policy, social services. Power imbalances are not exceptions in these places. They are structural features that inevitably distort behavior.
How so?
Well, in any hierarchy, the person in the position of power, the manager, the official, the administrator, is under pressure. They're pressured to comply, to protect the institution, and to prioritize the systemic needs over the individual's needs. This structural constraint creates a very fertile ground where intent can be corrupted or subtly distorted.
Let's analyze the real danger here, the one that's hardest to spot. The person holding power might be technically helpful and genuinely appear supportive. They seem empathetic, patient, they use all the right language.
Performance is perfect.
The performance is perfect. But quietly, their true primary motivation might be self-preservation or prioritizing institutional control, or just ensuring strict compliance with the system's often rigid rules.
Right. In the moment your needs, the individual's needs, conflict with the system's perceived stability.
That's the moment of truth.
That's it. The person with the distorted intent will favor the system, regardless of the supportive language they used 5 minutes earlier. They are performing their job, not partnering with you. And this is the moment the psychological price tag goes up dramatically for you.
And this is why this is particularly dangerous for vulnerable groups. The source highlights that these mixed messages, where someone is told, I'm here to help you access this care, while simultaneously facing layers of bureaucratic delay and denial, can feel especially unsafe for individuals with chronic illness, disabilities, or mental health conditions.
It's unsafe because it forces cognitive dissonance. The individual is left questioning their own reality. Am I being unreasonable? Is my need too complex? Why is this supportive person delivering such a harmful, contradictory outcome?
And that confusion is the point.
That confusion is not accidental. It is the predictable byproduct of a distorted intent that is prioritizing institutional stability over authentic support. Learning to see the true intent behind the performance is a major self-protection mechanism.
So we have to reiterate that understanding intent is absolutely not about applying a moral judgment or labeling others as good or bad. If we do that, we get tied up in their personal drama and we lose the objective clarity we need to protect ourselves.
Yes, this is about diagnosis, not judgment.
So what does this all mean for us, the listeners? It's about empowerment through informed decision-making. This knowledge is purely for your benefit.
Right.
If we can correctly diagnose that the professional or the colleague is acting primarily from, say, fear of their own job security or deep insecurity or just overwhelming institutional pressure, we can immediately adjust the level of access they get to our finite resources.
This is strategic management of access. It's like being a bouncer for your own mind. If you realize a person's intent is constrained by fear of their manager, you know not to trust them with truly sensitive personal information or to rely on them for courageous advocacy.
You adjust your expectations.
You adjust your expectations in your engagement. If you realize their intent is clouded by deep professional insecurity, you know not to rely on them for consistent, reliable partnership or creative problem solving.
And this awareness is what directly supports healthy boundary setting.
Directly. And it prevents the emotional exhaustion that comes from fighting battles you never understood the rules of. You choose to limit your exposure rather than attempting to change their fundamental nature.
I find the counselor's own self-assessment framework for their work to be a brilliant tool here, something we can apply to our own lives immediately. This is their purity checklist for potential engagements. They ask these questions. Who walks in with honesty?
Who carries emotional waste?
Who brings solutions versus who brings chaos?
And who will drain me versus who will partner with me?
Let's focus on that middle distinction for a second. Solutions versus chaos. Chaos, in this framework, is often the byproduct of projection and unresolved internal conflict, that emotional waste we mentioned earlier. It's the meeting where nothing gets decided because the person keeps changing the criteria or adding new layers of unnecessary drama.
Whereas solutions come from clear, honest, and focused intent. A person focused on solutions may still bring you difficult news, but they package it with clarity and a path forward. Chaos is the symptom of a contaminated process. Solutions are the byproduct of pure intent. When you run this checklist on an ongoing basis with a partner or an organization, you get a high-resolution view of their true commitment.
And finally, the source applies what it calls a powerful political lens. Politics is cited as an arena that is just full of hidden motives, constantly shifting alliances, and an enormous amount of performative concern.
Performative concern, that's a great phrase for it. People acting like they care because they know they're being watched. And in this arena, the failure to assess intent is particularly damaging. If you engage with performative intent, you risk fighting battles that, as the source says, do not belong to them. You lend your credibility, your time, and your emotional labor to a cause that is ultimately self-serving for the political actor, not for genuine reform.
You become a pawn in their game.
You do. When intent is performative, the goal is securing votes or maintaining status or visibility, not actual change. You, the listener, become a resource to be used in their struggle for power, rather than a partner in your own purpose. And this awareness forces a radical prioritization of your own purpose and goals over the noise of political or systemic theater.
Okay, so let's delve deeper into this exhaustion trap because I think this runs counter to a lot of cultural messaging. We are often taught that resilience means you have to keep fighting, you keep engaging, you pour yourself into every injustice you see. The assumption is that this constant action is a sign of strength.
It's the never give up mentality.
Exactly. But the source challenges this assumption directly, arguing that constant engagement is a direct path to emotional exhaustion. The difference strategically is between engaging in a collaboration that aligns with your purpose versus self-depleting on toxic conflicts that do not.
And this brings us back to the central concept we need to protect our mental inheritance.
Mm.
We introduced it as accumulated wisdom, but we need to really grasp its finite nature.
It's not a bottomless well.
Not at all. Think of your mental inheritance as your life support system. It's defined as your clarity, your intuition, your wisdom, and your emotional grounding. It is the deep, steady wellspring you draw upon to remain centered, present, and effective, especially when external systems are chaotic or when a genuine crisis hits.
And if it gets depleted.
If it gets depleted, it requires significant time and intentional work to replenish. It is limited, and its preservation must be treated like a strategic business decision.
And since it's limited, protecting it requires an active strategy, which brings us to the pause and assess strategy, the blueprint the peer counselor uses before jumping into an engagement. This strategy turns an emotional reaction into an intentional boundary.
Right. This strategy involves 4 core questions to ask yourself when you pause, before you commit your time or your energy to a person or a cause. These are the intentional boundaries you apply before you pay the emotional price tag.
Okay, what's the first question?
Question 1. Does the issue support my purpose or drain my energy? This is the fundamental cost-benefit analysis. A purpose-driven engagement may be hard work, it might be stressful, it might take time, but because it aligns with your core values, it is ultimately replenishing.
It feeds you even as it takes from you.
It feeds your sense of efficacy. Drainage occurs when the conflict distracts you from your purpose and forces you to manage another person's emotional burden or fight a battle that is fundamentally unwinnable because of their intent. If the honest answer is drain, the correct boundary is usually minimal engagement or total disengagement.
I can imagine it's easy to confuse hard work with drainage. How do we know the difference?
That's a great question. Hard work often has a clear, measurable objective, and you trust the partners involved, even if the obstacles are huge. Drainage, however, feels circular. You spend an hour discussing a problem and you leave the conversation feeling like the problem not only isn't solved, but the person you were talking to has now layered their personal insecurity onto your list of tasks.
So drainage is characterized by circularity and that transfer of emotional waste.
That's it, exactly. Okay, question 2. Is it rooted in a systemic problem or a personal projection? This is the application of the dual lens again. A systemic problem, like a hospital's poor discharge planning or an organizational culture of silence, requires a system-level strategy, collective action, and patience. A personal projection, like one colleague's insecurity, driving them to constantly undermine others, requires an individual boundary and emotional distance.
So if you misdiagnose a systemic issue as a personal one, you risk burnout trying to change one person when the whole structure needs reform.
Right. And if you misdiagnose a personal projection as a systemic failure, you end up validating their bad behavior and you magnify the conflict unjustly. The diagnosis has to be correct to conserve your resources.
Okay, what's number 3?
Question 3. Is the individual acting from integrity or from unresolved emotional distress? This goes right back to our behavioral markers. If the driver of their action is unresolved distress, the interaction will be unpredictable, confusing, and highly draining because their actions are volatile. If integrity is the driver, the interaction may still be challenging, but it will be reliable, honest, and growth-oriented.
And distress-driven actions require a different response.
They should be met with strong, immediate, protective boundaries. You cannot partner with volatility. It's just not sustainable.
And finally, the predictive question, which is perhaps the most pragmatic of all of them.
Yes. Question 4. Will engagement lead to understanding and growth, or will it pull me into ongoing emotional harm? Look at the track record. That's the key. If the pattern of your past interactions with this person or this system is just cyclical harm, no progress, no genuine change, only emotional depletion, then continued engagement is illogical. The framework demands that you choose only those engagements that lead to mutual understanding or growth, rather than those that are designed, often unintentionally, to just perpetuate confusion and self-doubt.
This sounds less like conflict avoidance and more like self-trust.
That's the definition the source gives. Protecting this inheritance through intentional boundaries is strategic preservation. not avoidance. Avoidance is rooted in fear, and it can lead to missed opportunities. Strategic preservation is rooted in self-knowledge and a commitment to your own mental stability. It is an essential competency, recognizing that your stability is your most valuable asset, and it must be proactively managed, just like any investment portfolio.
We've built up this ability to assess intent. But the final, highest level conceptual tool is synthesizing the individual's intent with the environment they operate in. The peer counselor, in their role as an educator, functions as a crucial bridge between the individual and these rigid institutional environments.
Right.
And these institutional environments, political parties, health systems, corporations, they're built on structure, hierarchy, rules, control. They are inherently rigid, often slow to change, and they frequently prioritize their own self-preservation above all else. So the counselor's job is to decode the system for the people it serves and then translate the human impact back to the system.
And to perform this bridge function responsibly and crucially, to protect their own mental inheritance, the counselor has to accurately diagnose the roles people play within these structures. If you don't correctly categorize the actor, you will misdirect your energy. The source details 5 critical roles people play within any system.
Okay, let's break them down. What's the first one?
Role 1. Who is working strictly in service of the system? These individuals are the functionaries. They're the people whose personal identity and purpose are entirely aligned with upholding the status quo. Their intent is to serve the rules as written, often without any critical thought about the impact of those rules.
So these aren't necessarily malicious people, but they are completely inflexible. They will cite chapter and verse of the policy manual, even when doing so causes demonstrable harm.
Exactly. Their behavior is often not personal at all. It is purely procedural. And this is essential knowledge, because you cannot appeal to their emotion or their empathy. You must appeal to their policy manual or to their superior's authority.
You have to speak their language.
You do. Role 2. Who is constrained by it? These individuals might possess pure, supportive intent, but their capacity for effective action is severely limited by rules, a crushing lack of resources, or just bureaucratic red tape. Think of a social worker with a caseload that's too large to manage effectively. They want to help, but the system prevents it.
This person is the ideal strategic ally. If you can help them navigate the constraints, they become an asset. You have to recognize their intent is pure, even if their current output is frustratingly low. You don't direct your frustration at them.
No, you direct it at the constraints they face.
Right.
Role 3. Who is being harmed by its limitations? This is the consumer, the client, the patient, or the frontline employee who is suffering the direct, negative consequences of the system's design flaws. Their behavior, be it fear, desperation, or outbursts, must be interpreted as a response to systemic harm, not as a personal flaw or manipulative intent.
That's a really important distinction to make.
It is. If a client is difficult and constantly demanding, you have to pause and ask if this difficulty is a deliberate strategy, which is manipulation, or is it a highly stressed survival response to a system that has repeatedly failed them, which is harm. If it's harm, your response must be compassion and clarity. If it's manipulation, your response must be boundaries and distance.
Then we have the person whose intent is genuinely contaminated, but they're cloaked in institutional authority.
Yes. Role 4. Who may be using it as a tool of control? This is the person whose intent is truly warped by ego or insecurity. They use the hierarchy and the rules, not to maintain necessary order, but to exercise personal power, manipulate their peers, or settle personal scores under the guise of following protocol.
How is that different from role 1, the functionary?
It's a critical distinction. The role 1 person follows the rules because they believe in the system. The role 4 person uses the rules as a weapon against a rival or someone they dislike. If a rule can be selectively applied to maximize their personal power, the role 4 person will use it that way every time. Their intent is purely selfish, but their actions look official.
And finally, the goal state. The person whose intent aligns with true partnership and growth.
Role 5, who is actively working toward reform. These are the true partners, the strategic allies. Their intent is aligned with improvement and growth, and they're willing to operate within the constraints while actively seeking to dismantle them ethically. They are the individuals whose partnership will genuinely lead to the understanding and growth we talked about earlier.
The consequence of failing to distinguish between these 5 roles seems immense. If you misdiagnose even one person, you just burn through your resources.
It is the ultimate drain. If we fail to separate behaviors driven by personal, manipulative choice from those that are shaped by systemic conditioning or fear or just survival, we risk catastrophic misinterpretation.
Give me a workplace example of that.
Okay, consider this. Manager A is a Role 4 person, using rules selectively to micromanage and control their direct reports, often citing best practices that only seem to apply to the people they dislike.
Right.
Then you have Manager B, who is a Role 2 person. They're constrained by a lack of funding and impossibly high executive expectations. They're doing their best in a bad situation.
Okay, I can picture both of them.
If you approach Manager B with the same suspicion and combativeness you would reserve for Manager A, you waste your energy fighting a potential ally, and you miss the opportunity for partnership. You risk internalizing the system's failure, saying, "I'm just bad at working with management," when in reality, the environment is being polluted by the toxic intent of Manager A, and Manager B is simply struggling against the tide, just like you are.
Wow.
Exactly. The ultimate preservation of your clarity comes from correctly diagnosing the situation. You need to know, is the poison in the person's inconsistent manipulative intent, or is the confusion and drain simply a predictable byproduct of the rigid controlling politics that stand behind them? This awareness allows you to place the responsibility where it actually belongs, on the system for systemic problems, on the person for manipulative intent, and on partnership for collaborative reform.
We've covered a tremendous amount of ground today, moving from the microscopic, the psychological cost of a single interaction, all the way to the macroscopic structure of systemic power, all using this framework of purity of intent.
It's a lot, but it all connects.
It does. We established that every interaction has that psychological price tag, and we gained clarity on the clear markers of integrity, consistency, respecting boundaries, and owning one's impact, versus the destructive flags of manipulation, which are blame-shifting, inconsistency, and creating confusion. The power of this knowledge, which was developed through the crucible of high-stakes peer counseling, it's profound because it gives you back your agency. Developing the skill of assessing intent shifts the focus away from that exhausting cycle of trying to change or fix other people.
A cycle that never works.
Never works. And it decisively redirects that energy toward protecting your most vital asset, your own mental inheritance, your clarity, and your stability. This is not just theory. It is a complete, essential framework for navigating a complex world that is filled with hidden motives.
So if understanding purity of intent is a necessary competency in a world that's defined by complicated systems, by politics, by power dynamics, consider this final thought for your own mental inventory as you go back into your daily interactions. How often have you looked at a point of friction or difficulty or personal depletion and mistakenly internalized a systemic failure or someone else's projection as a personal flaw of your own? The deepest, most enduring preservation of your strength often comes from correctly diagnosing the genuine source of the conflict. Is the poison in the person's inconsistent manipulative intent, or is the confusion and drain simply a predictable byproduct of the rigid, controlling politics that stand behind them? Diagnosing that distinction correctly is where your true power to set boundaries and maintain your peace lies.